what I would consider some really good advice as you're trying to grow your organization. The first things you need to hire are the places where you're weakest. And for me, it was the accounting and finance world. I also, in addition to hiring like in the business, I think when you think about mentors, I think you should also have people that are really, because some of the people, Spencer and Curran, frankly, that are sat on our early advisory board, a lot of them had a very financial background. CFO, somebody with a finance degree from a major university. Like we just staffed it up in my weak areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. And I think also and we talked about this even recently, Matthew, to the University of Alabama. We were talking about know what you're good at and know what you're not good at. And absolutely be brutally honest with yourself so that you can find those people if you're trying to grow your company and scale your company. So speaking of that, Phil joined, and then Curran, you came shortly after Phil. You were with us when we was just Birmingham. We hadn't moved. I don't think we had moved to Nashville yet. So you were around sometime in 2015. Talk about those early days, what you came into. What are some of the biggest struggles maybe that you saw, biggest things that we were struggling with?
Yeah, happy to be here, everybody. Again, Curran Melgoriho. I've been with Matthew and Spencer a little over 7 years now. And funny story from my seat, the week that I joined, we had actually just closed on our first acquisition in a new market. And that came with a new software that no one in the business knew how to run. And I walked in, and on day 2, the company asked me to run the owner statement process for this new software. So I got thrown to the deep end pretty quick. But I will say there's pretty much 3 things that were a big struggle when I first joined back in 2015, 2016. First one was we were running different processes for a lot of the accounting functions. So I mentioned that we were already in 2 different management software platforms, which just made it very difficult because you have to know 2 different platforms right away. I will say that's probably siloed of being problematic for us. I would assume that most listeners here are operating one software. But if you're not careful, you can start delivering different processes to different clients and almost get in a situation where you are practically running 2 different systems. So I would say simplifying your accounting processes is pretty critical. When you're first starting, there could be a tendency to maybe overpromise on clients to get them in the door and get the reporting going, which I'm not necessarily discounting. I think it's important to deliver a high level of service for your clients. But over time, as you're delivering that value, I would not be afraid to maybe have conversations with clients about what reporting they actually need. Because what we found is we made a lot of promises and started producing reporting for clients that they weren't really utilizing. And it was a big burden on the accounting team and was not providing a lot of value to clients. So the first big struggle that we had was, again, just running different processes as the business was growing. And as we were saying yes to a lot of things, we definitely were creating a problem that we would have to fix in the long run.
Curran's being really kind. I think I was in sales here and I was just promising everything to everybody. And so this is like a shot across the bow of Matthew made a bunch of promises that it was my responsibility to fulfill them.
Yeah.
But my close rate was super high, Curran.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important, again, bring on those clients, but don't be afraid to add friction after you've added some value to the client to make sure that you're actually delivering what's helpful to them. And the second thing to me is just, again, process changes and people changes. Typically, from what we've seen working with other businesses, people tend to hire as little as possible in the accounting realm. So you end up having 1 or 2 people that have almost all of the specific accounting knowledge. And if there's a staffing change in that situation, you could find yourself in a bad spot because there's no one else in the company that can really step in and pick up the work. So I was actually hired on to come in through accounting and move through operations, and that was our strategic model. But every time someone from the accounting department that had experience departed, we were almost starting at ground zero with a lot of our accounting functions. So making sure that you've got process documentation in place is pretty key, and that you're trying to spread out that knowledge and cross-train with people in the business so that as you have changes in a lean accounting department, you don't find yourself in a world of hurt because the person that knew everything, how to do everything on the accounting side, maybe ends up departing your company or moves to a different position. Couple of things that we did to, and Matthew, sounds like you got.
Yeah, let me just add some color right there. Don't forget what you were going to say. As entrepreneurs, we have a tendency to underfund the accounting department. Why do we underfund the accounting department? Because they're not revenue producers. And we're like, Current can just work. He can go from 60 to 70 to 80 hours. It's not a big deal. It doesn't bother me. But I think, like, to Current's point, if you underfund that accounting department, what ends up suffering, whether it's somebody leaving or whether it's like you start to drain their battery and burn their execution, then all of a sudden on the back end, you start to churn out clients, because accounting and communication are the two things that you absolutely have to get with your clients. And so that was one, again, Current's like throwing fireballs at me right now, but that is one thing that we did really poorly, is we understaffed the accounting department for a long time. And again, I get it, because it's not a revenue producer and it's just, in our mind, pure overhead, and you try to do more with less, and it's just not a super wise idea.
So when do you know that you need somebody full-time in that seat? And somebody asked, they asked, how big were we when Curran joined? Curran, do you remember? I would imagine 600-700.
It was about 850, 900 doors.
Okay.
So like, Spencer, like when you're crying and saying you need more help and we don't listen to you, when your accounting department's crying, you listen to them. Like the marketing department, you just don't care about them. But in all seriousness, I think Curran's probably better to answer that question about, like, when do you know it's important to start getting some extra help?
Yeah, it depends really on the evolution of your company. I would say there's a lot of kind of part-time measures or even outsourced solutions out there that can help you bridge the gap. So you're not immediately going from $0 in official accounting cost to then a large expense overnight. I would say when I joined, the company was around 800 doors. We did have someone in the accounting and finance seat, but they were spending, I'd say, about half their time on the actual company financials and half their time on property accounting and trust accounting. So if they had myself being full-time plus probably a 20-hour-a-week outsourced solution would have done it, particularly if you've got someone that's experienced. I was coming in with a lot of accounting experience coming from public accounting, but still had to obviously learn the company ins and outs and client requests. And again, it also depends on how complicated your processes are, because you could have 500 doors and say 300 clients. And if you're sending out 30 to 40 different types of financial packets, it's a huge burden on your accounting team versus if you're sending out the same thing to every single client. So a lot of it's going to depend on the makeup of the business. I would say a full-time plus part-time solution should be able to bridge the gap from 800 to 1,500 to 2,000 doors, assuming that you don't have an overly burdensome process running in the background and trying to deliver a bunch of different reporting to different clients.